Welcome back to the 1-0 podcast. I'm Seth Engle.
I'm Zach Allen.
We are fresh off a Thon weekend, 46 hours of standing. Not too much football news, but we did get to check out the Lash Football Building. Recently underwent that multi-million dollar renovation. It was really cool. Inside there was annual Penn State football Thon event, and
We got a bunch of stuff.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Kids were playing video games with athletes, playing some football, running on the treadmill. Just a pretty positive atmosphere in there. But we also got to talk to some players after the event for just general availabilities, and of those players was Olu Fashanu, the O tackle, who announced he's returning a couple months ago. He's been out due to injury for the last 5 games of the season, including the Rose Bowl. So we hadn't really had a chance to speak with him since he announced his return, but he kind of filled us in on why he decided to return for another year and kind of what his expectations are for the O-line next season. So, Zach, what are your main takeaways right off the bat from Olu's avail?
Yeah, we had like 4 people to talk to, and I think Olu's availability was like the most hyped up one since he's been out. He was out the last 5 games of the season. We haven't had a chance to talk to him. Just from his availability, one thing that obviously stood out to me was his decision to come back to Penn State. He was easily projected as a first-round pick, in some drafts even having him as a top 10 pick,
right.
And he elects to return to school for one more year. He said that he wanted to finish his degree and get started on his master's degree. But another thing I thought was interesting was the fact he said he definitely felt like he was NFL ready. He said the coaching staff, developed him. He worked on himself, and he felt ready. But he, chose to come back to school, and obviously that's going to bolster Penn State's offensive line next season.
Yeah, I think it goes without question. At the time that he announced, Olu was a projected first-round pick, as you mentioned. He was arguably the best tackle in the country last season, while he was healthy. So it seemed like a, surefire thing that he'd, go to the NFL, even with the injury concerns. I think it is interesting to bring up, the academics as he did when I asked if he was ready to go to the NFL. And he also brought up, his parents and them kind of coming into the decision process. Mm-hmm. He said, parents always, have a say in what goes on. He didn't necessarily say that it was their decision for him to come back and, finish his degree, get his master's, but it's hard not to think about that, as a potential factor in, him coming back was whether his parents, just really wanted him to get his degree. And, you kind of have to respect that, too.
Yeah, parents are always going to have a say in everything, especially since he just turned 20, still a young guy. But I think that's probably where he made his decision. And, you have to respect getting a degree, finishing school, because, football's not going to last forever.
Right.
But it still was surprising when you have a guy that didn't allow a sack last season in his time, didn't get penalized all season, not even a false start, for him to, come back to school, play another year.
Yeah.
But I'm sure James Franklin is happy about it. And
for sure.
The coaching staff.
It's not out of the question to assume that, he could end up being the best offensive lineman in all of college football next year. He was great last year when he was healthy. He looks a little bulkier than he did when we last saw him. He always looks bigger, I think, every time you see him. He's just a mammoth human being. But, I think there is a chance that he does end up being, a top 10 pick next year, as he may have been, this year. But probably an even greater likelihood next year if he stays healthy. But I guess moving on, Olu talked a lot about the O-line as a whole, where he fits in there, but also the other pieces around him. And we've talked a little bit about, where we project that O-line, but it's kind of clear, what pieces could fall into place there, I think, pretty early on. So what are your main takeaways right away where you kind of see this O-line shifting.
Yeah, I mean, coming into last season, it was a lot of, versatility. You had Hunter Norzad specifically playing center and both guard spots. And I think there still will be that for some of the guys, but I think on less of a scale. I think Landon Tangwall will be set at guard.
Yeah.
Same with Sal Wormley. And, with Juice Scruggs gone now for next season, Hunter's going to have to be that center.
Yep.
And, another guy that, Olu brought up in his availability when we were talking to him was Drew Shelton, who replaced Olu when he was injured for those 5 games and had, a solid end of the season for a true freshman, first year on the team. And so I think it'll be a lot more set where the positions are, which I think will help too in blocking schemes, run blocking, all that sort of stuff.
For sure.
So I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into last year, even as you approached like week 1, there were still a bunch of competitions. I mean, that right tackle position with, Caden Wallace, you kind of didn't know who was going to start week 1, and Caden Wallace ended up, dealing with some injuries later in the year. So he was replaced by Drew Shelton at right tackle. It doesn't seem like we're really going to have that this year. I know we're only 2 weeks into winter workouts, but I mean, the names you just mentioned, I think it's pretty clear, who's going to start. I mean, Olu at left tackle, Drew Shelton at right tackle, Landon, if he's healthy, should move back to left guard, I think pretty easily. Right guard, I think that Sal Wormley earned that spot after last year. He was definitely one of the best run blocking guards in the Big Ten. And then, at center, Hunter Norzad. Hunter started to take reps in practice at center late in the year as people saw Juice Scruggs. Time was coming to an end, and Olu talked a little bit about that as well. Hunter's a hard worker. He's one of the oldest players on the team, having been a grad transfer from Cornell and added a 5th year of college last year, so now he's going to play his 6th year at Penn State this year. I think he's an experienced vet. Juice is a big loss, but Hunter was pretty good when he played at guard last year. So we'll kind of see how that plays out, but it should be a strong unit for sure.
Especially going back to what you said about Hunter's age, there are 3 early enrollees at offensive line too, and Javen Williams, Alex Birchmeyer, and Anthony Donko. And I think, kind of having that age, obviously we've talked about leadership a lot, but having that age and experience to kind of help those younger guys get into the swing of things, similar to how Olu did with Drew Shelton, will greatly help them develop in the future too.
For sure. Yeah, and I think also with Penn State's O-line last year, I think the thing that was most impressive was the fact that they had that great depth. So if someone went down, someone else stepped up, and a lot of that was based on leadership. It was that next man mentality. So when you look at the guys, after those 5 names that we just mentioned, who could potentially step up too, and we'll kind of see how the freshmen develop as well. But I mean, there are guys. Caden Wallace, as we just talked about, at tackle, told me after the Rose Bowl that he's taken reps at guard. He's in winter workouts. He's claimed some of those competitor of the day tweets from coaches. So it looks like he's kind of back to doing what he's doing after that injury. Maybe we see Yurcich finally move him inside, as he hasn't done over the past couple of years. He's got the frame to do it. I mean, he's a big man. He's over 300 pounds. I think he's about 6'5". It's a big kid right there. So I think if they move him inside, that could be a really good piece at guard. And then also Venga Yone is another guard to watch for, who we heard some great things about as a freshman last year. Played a little bit at the end of the year as well. And then J.B. Nelson.
I was about to say
J.B. Nelson's another one. So there's some great depth on the O-line. I think
it's come a long way than what it was.
It has.
A couple years ago, and even last offseason, I talk about this all the time, but Franklin, they had to run double reps at times because they just didn't have anyone, to fill in. So
yeah, I think even 2 years ago, Like,
Yeah,
it was a problem. Well, it was a big problem. It's a big reason why the run game never got going. It was a big reason why the run game did get going this year. Was that the O-line was just so much better, and Drew should benefit from that as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of an improved unit over the past couple of years. And something I always think about is I look back at that 2019 Cotton Bowl win, and I think about how good that team was, but the one area where they really weren't that great was the secondary. And it's just funny to me now where I see, a great Penn State O-line, which they didn't have a couple of years ago, and, a fantastic secondary, arguably the best in the country, even without Joey Porter Jr. So we talked to Olu, but we also talked to Kalen King, who said he's, developing as a leader and filling Joey's, shoes. But, I think Kalen King could be, really good this year, maybe even better than Joey was last year.
Yeah, obviously Joey's a big loss. He would have been a big loss to any secondary, but Kalen King, I think he was either tied for first in the country in pass breakups,
he was tied.
Or he was the sole. Yeah, he was tied. Obviously, they didn't throw to Joey a lot. Opposing quarterbacks did not throw to Joey a lot.
Yeah.
But Kalen King was no slouch at all either. He had a pick in the Rose Bowl. Now he's set to be cornerback 1. And the name he mentioned was Storm Duck, the transfer. He said he's fitting right in winter workouts. Obviously, it's still early in the winter workout season. And then Johnny Dixon too.
Yep.
He was a great rusher off the edge too with Manny Diaz. He kind of utilized him at the line of scrimmage too. So there's just 3 guys that could all produce solid seasons as Joey, obviously departs to bigger and better things.
Yeah, and similar to what we just mentioned about depth with the O-line, it's similar with the cornerbacks. Like, there's almost like a rotation there where if someone goes down, like, someone's going to come in and he's not too shabby as well. And that was the case with the cornerbacks last year, where you had Kalen, Joey, and Johnny Dixon, who were all deserved of a starting spot, but you can't play 3 corners at the same time. It's the same thing this year. Storm Duck was all ACC last year. Like, he's competing for a starting spot right now. That's a good sign about where things are going for Penn State secondary, and I think that's the goal for every positional group.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention Daquan Hardy at nickel.
Yeah, and he's
been locking
that
down for 2 seasons now.
Yeah. What I'm interested to see is if they have someone in mind who can kind of play that type of role, because it's a really unique position, and Daquan just plays it so well. He's got the speed and strength, which is kind of hard to find. But maybe we'll start to see this year, maybe some guys following in his footsteps. Maybe interesting to ask him about that. But yeah. So I think we covered it all there. Thank you for tuning in to the 1-0 Pod. We'll be back with more coverage next week. Follow along at collegian.psu.edu online and on Twitter at 1-0 Pod.